friends, you're watching West Bloomfield 911. I'm Officer Rick, and on behalf of Chief Mike Patton and my brothers and sisters in the West Bloomfield Police Department, welcome to another show. And of course, I get to introduce a co-host, my friend, Dave McNeely. How are you, Dave?
Hey, how you doing?
Good, good. Welcome back. You didn't run away.
Nope, I'm still here.
Yeah, good. Good. We're glad to see it. That's why I got you chained to the floor.
That's right.
We'd also like to introduce a very special guest today, a good friend. I'd like to introduce Julie Baumer. She is the Exonoree Advocate for Criminal Justice Reform. That's a long one. With the Innocence Project. Julie,
yes.
How are you?
Thank you.
I'm glad to have you here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Great. Now, don't run away either.
Of course not.
We're going to do a segment we call the Corner Spotlight, in which we kind of highlight an employee of the police department.
Wonderful.
Folks, if you will look on the screen, you will see the smiling, handsome face of Police Service Aide Chase Lanning. Chase is, again, like some of the recent people we've highlighted, he's a relative newbie. He's been with us since August of 2015. And we are glad to have this fine young man, because it's people like this that make us feel secure and comfortable knowing we have some good people coming into law enforcement that will follow us oldsters once we leave. Chase's favorite food, one of the reasons I like this guy, steak. Nothing like sinking your teeth into some good red meat. And his favorite book, The Dark Tower. He said it's a 7-book series by Stephen King, and I've read none of them, Chase. And the first one was published on June 10th of 1982. And his favorite movie, Lucky Number Slevin. Yeah, I didn't stutter. That's Slevin, not 7. Lucky Number Slevin was made in 2006, starring Bruce Willis, Morgan Freeman, and it's kind of a whodunit. And he says it's a great movie. And you know what? If it's got Morgan Freeman in it, just him being on screen is a wonderful thing. Favorite music? Hey, you know, he likes steak, and what else does he like? Classic rock and roll. What a great kid. And he said the Beatles are his dad's favorites. You know what, Chase? You've got a very smart dad, because they're my favorite as well. Some of his accomplishments and hobbies: he loves hiking, camping, and living in the wilderness. Well, West Bloomfield isn't the wilderness anymore, but that's a wonderful thing. And get out there and have some fun. And he said he loves, you'll never believe this, I've never known anyone to do this, he loves to start fires without matches. And it's just like in the old days. And he said it's called, I'm going to screw this up, ferro rod, also known as ferrocerium. I hope I said that right, Chase. Ferrocerium. And that's using the old sticks and everything the way they did it in the olden days. When I asked him about his favorite quote, he said, "Its limits begin where vision ends." And that's actually from the late sports psychologist, Gary Mack, from his book, Mind Gym. You know, Chase, one thing I want to tell you before you go, that movie, or that book, The Dark Tower, actually was 8 books. There was an 8th book, which was a limited edition, called The Wind Through the Keyhole, in February of 2012. But you probably already knew that. Folks, we're going to turn the spotlight off on this great young man, Police Service Aide Chase Lanning. We thank you for being here, Chase, and we thank you for all you do, and I'll see you at the barn. Folks, we'd like to give a little safety tip before we continue with our guest. We get a lot of calls about people claiming to be from the IRS, or from the police department, or from the FBI. People get emails saying that they, again, work for all those agencies, or they work for Google or Microsoft. And if you give us your personal information, we will fix your computer. Please look at our Facebook page, or we have a link to the Attorney General, or you can go right to the Attorney General's website. There are a lot of these going all over the state and all over the country. They are a scam. So do not link on any of those if you get an email. And if you get a phone call, don't call those folks back. Don't even pick up the phone if you don't know who's calling you by name or number. Go to the website. A lot of things you got to worry about is if it's high pressure, if they want personal information. Don't give anybody that unless you've contacted them first and you know exactly who they are. If you have any questions, please feel free to give me a call in the Crime Prevention Unit, and I'll be glad to help you. So folks, stay safe. Keep your money in your pocket. Don't give it to anyone else. And we will be right back, so don't go away. And thank you for watching West Bloomfield 911.
You're watching West Bloomfield 911 on Civic Center TV, a service of the Greater West Bloomfield Cable Communications Commission. For more information or to watch episodes on demand, visit civiccentertv.com/WB911. Civic Center TV, television that's close to home.
Michigan is a melting pot of various cultures and races in which we all live side by side. The Anti-Defamation League is an organization that focuses on fighting anti-Semitism and bigotry of all kinds. The ADL works with schools and businesses to provide education and outreach to the community. To learn more about the Michigan Regional Anti-Defamation League, visit michigan.adl.org or call 248-353-7553.
Hello and welcome back. I'm here with my co-host, Dave McNeely. Dave, did you bring the beverages this time?
No, I forgot them, but I'll have them next time for sure.
You keep telling me, Dave. You keep promising me. We also have a very special guest and a dear friend, Julie Baumer. How are you, Julie?
Very well, thank you.
And once again, folks, Julie is the Exonoree Advocate for Criminal Justice Reform at the Innocence Project. But I got to know Julie because Julie actually now works as the administrative assistant for Our Lady of Redemption Melkite Parish in Warren,
Yes.
and that's my parish where I got to know you from.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, you do a great job there.
Well, thank you. It's a wonderful community.
Yeah, keep up the good work. We're
Well,
glad to
thank
have you. But Julie, we don't have you here to talk about that. We have you here because you unfortunately had an experience in life that nobody wants to experience.
Right.
And why don't you give us a little background on it, because you got very intimately involved with the criminal justice system in a way that nobody wants to.
Yes.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yes. Back in 2003, my sister, she gave birth to a little boy whom she was unable to care for.
Okay.
So with the blessing of my family, if you will, I decided to do an in-family adoption. And so when my nephew Philip was born, there was a few complications at birth, and he was in neonatal intensive care for about a week. But
Okay.
after they released him, I brought him home, and then 5 weeks later, he had a collapse, if you will. He stopped eating for me. And so by direction of his pediatrician, I took him into the emergency room, and from that point, they didn't. I took him to the emergency room in Macomb County, and so they weren't sure what was going on with him. So they transferred him down to Children's Hospital.
In Detroit.
In Detroit, right. And then about 48 hours later, I was contacted by the Sheriff's Department and asked to come in to interview. And they suspected that my nephew had been shaken and that I was the primary suspect because I was the primary caregiver.
Now, how old was your nephew at this time?
He was about 5 weeks.
5 weeks old. So here you are, you think you're doing something good. You want to keep the baby in the family.
Yes.
You're willing to become the mother of this
Yes.
child because at that time, unfortunately, your sister had some issues with drugs.
Yes.
And thank God, though, she's doing much better now.
Yes, absolutely.
But as we talked on a previous show with another dear friend, drugs can really capture your mind and just screw everything up for you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So here you wanted to take care of your baby, your baby nephew.
Yes.
And it was Macomb County Sheriff that called you?
Yes.
Because you were living in Macomb County at that time.
Yes.
Okay, kind of go through the process of how your world seemed to close in on you at that point.
Well, when they called me in for an interview, it took about 20 minutes into the interview for me to actually catch on as to what they were accusing me of. And of course, everything became surreal from that moment. You know, it was like a nightmare that no one could imagine. And so they didn't initially charge me for several months. What they did is after Philip recovered, he actually ended up having a stroke, a form of childhood stroke, venous sinus thrombosis, which we didn't know at the time because the doctor had failed to do the proper MRI and CAT scan.
That would be the doctors at the hospital.
Right,
Okay.
right. And so when they finally did realize that there was an issue, because his head was swelling, if you will, so he did have bleeding in the brain.
Okay.
And so he was actually stroking while he was at the hospital, but they weren't aware of this.
Oh, my.
So when they realized that there was an issue, then they had to go in and do an emergency surgery to relieve the pressure off of the brain. And of course, you know, a subdural hematoma, if you will. That's one of the signs, if you will. They don't even call it baby shaken syndrome anymore now. They call it abusive head trauma.
Okay.
And unfortunately, the baby shaken syndrome, that's become an epidemic, if you will. And if you have either detached retinas or subdural hematomas, if you will, immediately those who are not educated and properly, you know, updated on their education, of course, they assume, okay, this child's been shaken, versus looking at other medical reasonings. And so they actually placed my nephew into foster care, and they didn't allow anybody in my family nor myself to have contact with him. And it wasn't until February of 2004 that they initially contacted me and told me that I had a certain amount of time to turn myself in and that I was being formally charged with.
Is that ER trained now? Is that something that is that a standard now that they look for?
I hope so. I hope so. I've been told that the doctor who originally came up with this term, baby shaken syndrome, in the 70s, he's now in his 90s, and he's recently written an article in one of the medical journals stating that he had no idea that it was going to go in the direction that it has.
So you're saying, because it seems like what you're saying is that condition that your nephew had mirrors that.
Absolutely.
And the protocol that they have, like say in an ER,
sure,
is that to look for that, and they connected the dots that way.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And because I was the primary caregiver and the last person, you know, for him to be in my care, if you will, the doctor who actually testified against me, he gave the timeline that Philip was allegedly shaken 24 to 48 hours prior to my taking him into the emergency room. But of course, that was inaccurate.
Now, when was it that you took your nephew, and what month or what year was it?
It was in October of 2003, and he was born in August of 2003.
So now this is a year later, they're telling you that
well,
you're going to have to turn yourself in.
Yeah, several months later,
Okay.
February of 2004.
Okay. So now in 2004, and was there a reason why they would not let anybody else in the family adopt your nephew?
No, that's a mystery that we haven't been able to solve yet, and it's something that we really haven't, you know, this is going back a couple of years now,
Right.
so it's something, but of course there's issues within the service of social
thing,
services, you know, there's obviously some issues there as well,
Right.
so.
Now, were you living alone at the time?
Yes.
Okay. And they would not let your father or anybody else in the family, because you have a pretty good-sized family.
Yes, absolutely. They did contemplate on allowing my parents to take him. However, they would have had to have signed an affidavit stating that myself nor my sister, Philip's biological mother, wouldn't be able to have any contact
Yes.
with. And of course, my parents said we're not going to close our doors to our daughters.
Right.
I have a sister who's down in Florida. At the time, she was actually employed for the state of Florida as a social worker, and with a permission and blessing from her husband and family, she offered to come up to Michigan and rent an apartment until all of this got settled and whatnot, and to take him. And they even denied her. So it's a mystery. I'm not sure why that would be.
Okay, so they've had the investigation, and they've had the trial. What were some of the problems that you saw from your perspective from the trial, and how long did that stretch out?
Well, initially, I was very, very sure that the heart of my defense was birth trauma, because Philip did undergo a traumatic birth, if you will, and there was some complications. Of course, he was hospitalized for a week after his birth. And so, and of course, they had induced my sister's labor by way of Pitocin, and after he was diagnosed with a cerebral palsy and we had done some research, we were like, well, that's absolutely the heart of, you know, my defense. And so, for 18 months prepping for my first trial, I would meet with my attorney, who I retained with my own money. I went ahead and I was under the assumption that we were, you know, that was going to be my defense. However, during opening remarks, his last sentence during his opening remarks is, you know, he points at me and he says, whatever happened to this child didn't happen on my client's watch. And so I really pretty much thought, oh my Lord, you know, I'm in the dark now. I have no idea where he's going with this. And so unfortunately 4 weeks later, after the prosecuting attorney and that side, they had unlimited resources to have their experts come and testify.
Right.
And of course, I was in my mid-20s at that time. I ran out of funds. I couldn't afford to hire anybody to come testify on my behalf. And so it was a battle of the experts, and I didn't have anybody to defend me.
Right.
So a jury, they hear what they believe to be the facts from two doctors, and it is what it is, unfortunately.
So what were you convicted of?
I was convicted of child abuse, first degree.
Okay. And at that point then, were you turned over right away for incarceration?
After the guilty verdict, yes.
Okay. And where did you go, or where were you sent after the for incarceration?
Originally, I was sent to Scott's facility, Scott's in Plymouth. It was a women's facility, and then they recently closed that down a couple of years back. And then from there, I went to the Huron Valley Correctional Facility.
Okay. Now, how long did you spend in prison?
About 4.5 years.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about your time there?
Well, it wasn't a cupcake ride.
Great, was it?
No, not at all. I was certainly a fish out of water, but I kept my faith, if you will, born and raised Catholic. I knew that justice was going to prevail. I didn't know how. I immediately started I immediately started my appeal process, and I tried to maintain some form of normalcy while I was in there waiting for my case to get through the courts.
Did you have a court-appointed attorney the next time around, or did family help you? And how did this it's got to shake your opinion of the courts and of law enforcement? Can you tell us about that?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, for my first appeal, I was assigned a court-appointed attorney. Unfortunately, she, for whatever reason, when she wrote up her brief and submitted it to the courts, she didn't include any possibility of new evidence. She went ahead and she just basically went through what happened during the trial. And so, of course, my appeal was denied at that point. And so, of course, I continued on with a second appeal. If we could just back up, if you can just rephrase the second part of your question, or if you can remind me.
I was just wondering, after you were incarcerated.
Yes.
I mean, I'm just as a human side here, is I'm thinking of, would shake me, my faith in the courts and law enforcement. If you could just tell us about that, like what it did, how did that impact you?
Well, absolutely, because, being a layperson, you put your faith into the law enforcement, you put your faith into doctors and lawyers and whatnot, and you believe that they're there to protect you and to do the right thing. And unfortunately, in my case, prejudice and pride overtook justice. And so I don't want to say that I completely lost faith in the justice system. I just realized that, we're all humans and humans err. And unfortunately,
it's imperfect.
Exactly. But it works, this miscarriage was corrected.
If you stay the course.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so now you had your second appeal.
Yes.
Was it at that point that you were able to eventually garner release?
No, actually, on my second appeal, I was denied that as well.
Okay.
So that will take us to September of 2007,
okay.
And I was pretty much out of resources. I was indigent, single, and so I didn't have any ways of hiring an attorney, if you will. At that point, though, I did start sending out letters to various agencies asking for pro bono assistance. And then in 2009, the Innocence Project and the University of Michigan, their Innocence Project, which is an exclusively non-DNA clinic, they opened up. And prior to them getting involved, though, this is actually where divine intervention, came through, if you will. It was in December of '07, and I had that information that, okay, my gosh, there's a possibility that I'm stuck here for 13 more years. How am I going to do this? And I ended up getting a religious visit from Felician nun, Sister Lois. And she said that she had gotten my name from a prayer list, and she just wanted to come visit me and see how things were going. And so she asked me to share my story with her, and upon doing so, she asked if she could have the permission to share my case with Charles Lugosi, formerly of the Ave Maria School of Law.
Okay.
And so pretty much...
and that was in Ann Arbor at that time,
At
correct?
that time, yes. So of course I was more than willing to share anything that, that she needed me to. So I sent on my transcripts to Charles Lugosi, and his students actually found merit in the case. And then it just started, the Calvary just started building itself, if you will. By that time, the Innocence Project had opened up, and they became involved. And then we had Carl Marlinga, who from Macomb County.
Sure.
He wanted to do a pro bono innocence case, and so he jumped on board. And we ended up having several world-renowned neurologists and ophthalmologists and all those
So who
other...
did the digging into the medical aspect of it to bring that to light for you? Who did that?
She was actually, she's an attorney, Heather Kirkwood, and she's actually based out in Seattle, and she does pro
works
bono.
for the Innocence Project?
No, she's solo, but she does work pro bono, specializing in SBS cases. And she saw, of course, merit in my case, and she had the radiology scans and the CAT scans from Philip's brain, and she sent those on to Patrick Barnes of Stanford, who is a high-ranking neurologist, if you will. And immediately he looked at that and he said, "That child wasn't abused. That's clearly a stroke."
Right.
And so, of course, with several other doctors agreeing, that was my new defense, and I was absolutely. I remember I was still incarcerated when I learned this information, because I would call, every couple of weeks,
Sure.
Find out how's the progress of the appeal going. And when they told me your nephew had a stroke, I just thought, oh my Lord, I truly believed that there was birth trauma
Right.
that caused his injuries, but to actually have that information and to say, okay, we have the facts of this, it was very, very relieving, very relieving.
Now you said the lawyer in Seattle worked on, did you say SBS projects?
It's shaken baby syndrome, yes.
Just so everyone knew what we're talking
Sure.
about. Now, so you were granted a new trial because of all this new evidence that had come to light, correct?
Yes.
Was this in the same courtroom that your initial trial was held?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Initially, the prosecutors, they had a gentleman's agreement, though, with my attorneys, and they said that if the judge overturned my conviction, they would just let bygones be bygones and we would all go our own ways. However, in November of 2009, the judge wrote his order overturning my conviction, and I actually wasn't released for several weeks later, because I had to, the state decided to recharge me, and then I had to go for a bond hearing and pretty much start from scratch,
Now,
preparing for the second trial.
When you went back for the trial that eventually exonerated you, did they bring in the same doctors that initially spoke against you?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And sadly, the one doctor, when he was interviewed by the students from the University of Michigan, they were trying to get him to come to our side. Unfortunately, his response was, well, yes, that does look like a stroke, and I might have been wrong on this case, and unfortunately, I have a practice and a family to protect, and I'm not changing my testimony. So he chose not to change his testimony. Same with the second doctor as well.
Yeah.
So that was unfortunate, but of course, the jury, they heard the testimony from the doctors that were testifying on my behalf, and they added up the facts, and it just it didn't seem right. I wasn't present, but when they spoke with the jury, when the attorney spoke with the jury after the trial, I was told that actually one of the jurors asked, "Well, are you going to go after the doctors for for lying on the stand or whatnot?" So, but I don't know what the outcome of that was.
Yeah. Okay, now when you were in the courtroom during this trial.
Absolutely.
And when you heard the jury pronounce those words you wished to hear the first time around.
Yes.
Those two sweet words.
Yes.
Not guilty.
Yes.
What went through your mind and your family at that time?
I was absolutely exhilarated. I remember I gave a big exhale, if you will, like I had been holding in all the stress for so long, and of course I became emotional, and you know, I composed myself and whatnot, and it that was almost surreal, if you will, because going into the first trial, I knew my innocence, my family knew my innocence, but of course I came back with the guilty verdict, and then, you know, the second time I'm so much more prepared, and I have such a beautiful defense. And I was just really, you don't know what's going to happen.
How soon after you were found not guilty were you released?
Oh, immediately. Yes, I had been out on bond for about 10 months prior.
Okay.
So when I went in, it was a Friday morning. They called us back in and said the jury's back, and you know, they came back in and read the verdict by 9:30, October the 15th, 9:30 a.m.
Now, that was when you were exonerated in October of 2010. The prosecutor, though, wished to go back and revisit that, or that was the end of it?
Oh yeah, that's the end of it. Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
very good.
Yes,
very good.
Absolutely.
Now, you're free, but your life's kind of in disarray.
Yes.
And your son, your nephew, that was going to be your son through adoption, you've lost him.
Yes, he's been
and
adopted out.
He's been adopted by people outside of your family.
Yes.
And hopefully he's been adopted by at least by a loving family.
I believe
anyway.
so.
That's
I believe
good.
so.
That's good. Now you started. You wrote a few articles or a couple novels, right? And one was published in 2012 called "An Undeserved Sentence."
Yes, that's completely unrelated to my case. It was just
okay.
yes.
It
was
had to do with your undeserved sentence.
No. It was just a way of me to relieve tension while I was incarcerated.
Kind of cathartic.
Yes, absolutely. And so, and then after my release, I needed employment. So I thought, well, I went into my Foot Locker and I dug out a couple of these novels, and I thought maybe I'll try to publish these to bring some income in. That was badly needed. You know, you have a 5-year gap on your resume, and you tell the truth, and you don't get the phone calls back, and then you don't tell the truth, and it's you still don't get the phone calls. It took me almost 2.5 years to find steady employment.
And that was at
Our Lady of Redemption. Yes. God bless you guys.
Yeah. And how long have you been with us now?
Going on 4 years.
Really? Wow.
Yes.
Time flies.
I
So does
know.
everything come off?
Oh yes,
You expunged everything
Yeah,
is off
immediately
now.
everything's been expunged. Currently, though, we are still trying to work to get my DNA back, because after I was convicted, the Sheriff's Department did swab my mouth, and my DNA was put into the database, and so we are currently trying to get that back.
Okay, so now you're working for Our Lady of Redemption. You do a phenomenal job there. You also have to increase your income. You also have your own company, a silkscreen and embroidery business called Little Harry's Closet.
Yes.
So, and that's, if people are interested, they can go to littleharryscloset.com.
Yes,
correct?
thank you.
And you're also doing work for the Innocence Project.
Absolutely.
Now, and correct this for me if I'm wrong. Is the Innocence Project, even though they took your case, do they usually only take people that are on death row?
No.
I thought I'd read that,
no.
but that's
No, the original project opened up in New York with Barry Scheck, of course, back in the 80s.
Okay.
And then each state, through conjunction with his project, they would open up their own projects.
Okay.
And so those states that still have the death row penalty, of course, they have their own innocence projects connected through the main one. And so it's not just exclusively.
Okay. Now let's talk about what you do for the Innocence Project. I know that you go speak to law schools.
Yes.
And talk about some of the other things you do for them.
Pretty much, I try to just advocate, to be an advocate for the project, and try to share my story, do some public speaking and whatnot. Currently, here in Michigan, we don't have a compensation, any law that compensates those who have been wrongfully convicted.
Okay.
So for the past several months, I've been working closely with Senator Steve Bita, who is helming this bill, Senate State Bill 291, and we're hoping to get that passed into law, so that those of us who have been wrongfully convicted, we can be compensated by some way.
To help make up for that gap.
Yeah, unfortunately, though, I don't think, in my case, everything I've lost is priceless.
Right.
So.
Now, how many states have some sort of compensation package?
Currently, there's 30.
So over half.
And all of our surrounding sister states have it.
Okay.
So we're behind the times.
You say compensation, like, how can you put a dollar amount on something like your situation?
Exactly, you can't. Currently, right now, according to the current language of the bill, they're offering $60,000 a year for each year that you were wrongfully convicted, and like I said, in my particular case, everything that I lost was so priceless, so you can't really put an amount on it. But I generally sort of like to ask people, in your current life, would you give up your current life for a year for $60,000 and go away to prison?
Right.
So, but it's a step in the right direction because, again, personally for myself, it would be a healing process. I've never received a formal apology.
Right.
I've never had anyone other than the actual not guilty verdict. I've never had anyone from the state come back and say, hey, we apologize for this error or whatnot. And so that would help bring a lot of closure for me.
And I would guess at this point it's probably not going to happen either.
Probably not.
Okay, so now you help out the Innocence Project, and this is a volunteer position, correct?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
So now you're going around, you're trying to help others that have been in your position.
Sure.
And one of the things that you did is you appeared in front of the state legislature in Lansing talking about Senate Bill 291, did you not?
Absolutely, yes. I testified twice.
Okay.
And fortunately, after that testimony, we had unanimous votes both times.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Excellent. Now, where does that stand at this point? Has to go to the State House?
Yeah, currently, I believe it's in the House.
Okay. Now, do you have to go back and testify again?
When I get the phone call, I'll be there.
Now, you also go to law schools?
Yes.
Who else do you speak to about this?
Basically, anybody who will listen, because this can happen to anybody.
Right.
And, of course, prior to this happening to me, you, like I said, you're a lay person and you're blinded to the injustices, if you will. And so I just try to educate and inform anybody that, that not only with the shaken baby syndrome epidemic, if you will, but as a whole, the wrongful conviction, those who have been wrongfully convicted, that, there really seriously is an issue. Currently in Michigan, the Michigan Innocence Clinic, they're probably exonerating one per year.
Really?
Yeah, on an average since I've been home, and that's 6 years now.
Yeah.
So.
Now, when you go to some of these law schools, what's kind of the response you get from these people? Are young, they're kind of entering the law profession probably because they haven't practiced yet. They all have this kind of pristine view of criminal justice.
Yeah.
What is the impression or reaction you get from some of these
Well,
folks?
of course, there's you have your fair share who are, they're appalled and shocked and whatnot. But basically, I'm not there to try to shock and, appall anybody. I'm just there to try to, again, raise awareness for the issue. And so what I generally tell these kids, if you will, because, they're a lot younger than me, what I try to share with them is that, regardless of what field you're going to go into law, at some point in your future, you may be faced with a dilemma such as mine. My attorney, I'm sure he had the best intentions, but instead of actually going to the courts and saying, hey, she needs assistance, it's his pride that he didn't ask for assistance. So, I tell these, these young professionals to be, God bless you guys for doing what you're doing and for having the zeal what you're doing, but at some point in the future, if you feel that you need assistance or help, don't shy away from asking for it.
Right.
So, because I would hate for that to be on your conscience, somebody like myself.
Right. And, I got to commend you because you haven't become bitter about this.
Oh, I have my days.
Well, one can go through depression
totally
and
understandable.
sadness.
Yes.
Yeah. But that's the difference between being bitter too all the time.
I would never be able to move forward if I did so, you know.
Now, and you know, and I commend you as well, because you can look at some of the attorneys who maybe played the part in getting you convicted, but you've also had a lot of attorneys that have come to your rescue.
Absolutely, yes.
So we have to look at both sides.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
Now, we're just about out of time, Julie. So, you know, I just wanted to let the people know, you know, Julie is devout Catholic, serves at our church, and at one time you even considered entering the convent.
Yes, absolutely.
So you've got kind of the strange dichotomy in your life that you have this faith, we're considering entering convent, and then convent, and then in the eyes of some, even though you were exonerated, like you said, you didn't receive the phone calls back, they may still consider you an ex-con.
Yes.
How do you work that out in your head?
It's an emotional scar that I'm going to have, you know, for some time. But you know, like I said, I just rely back on my faith, and you know, I love the Lord very much, and you know, he didn't get on that. He wasn't guilty when he got on that cross. By no way am I comparing myself to him, but you know, in the hindsight of of God's plan, you know, I remember it was a time when I was, you know, in the middle of my incarceration. Instead of crying, God, why me, why me, why me? I started saying, okay, Lord, how can I glorify you in this situation? And ironically, several months later, that's when the Calvary came to my rescue. So, you know, it's just about taking your lemons and making lemonade, I guess.
You know, and Dave doesn't know this, but I found it fascinating as well. As you know, we honor fallen officers, and one of the officers we remembered was a Michigan Department of Corrections officer whom you met while you were incarcerated.
Yes, Candy.
Yes, and I remember you telling me some things, you know, that he was one of those individuals that even in spite of the fact you're incarcerated, he treated you and the other ladies there with
very
professional.
professional. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And that really, really makes a difference, regardless if you're innocent or not. When you're in that type of situation, and you've lost your identity, and you're basically told on a day-to-day basis that you're property of the state of Michigan, it's nice to have that human touch just from somebody. You know, not physical, but that human connection. So it's very good.
Absolutely. Julie, we're just about out of time, so why don't you, is there something you'd like to tell the public about the Innocence Project, or about I guess your situation and those who are in similar situations like you?
Well, yeah, sure, absolutely. Don't hesitate in contacting your local Innocence Project. Just Google, you know, Innocence Project in the state of whatever state you're in here in Michigan. Definitely contact your local state representative if you choose to be in favor of this bill to compensate those who have been wrongfully. Senate Bill 291. And so, yeah, basically just take the power of Google and educate yourselves.
Now, you know, and let me ask a quick question. Is the Innocence Project, is that like a 501c3?
I believe so, yes. It is nonprofit.
Okay, so if people wish to donate to help the Innocence Project out, they can certainly do that as well.
Absolutely, yes, yes, yes. And the Innocence Clinic here in Michigan, U of M, they absolutely take donations as well.
Excellent. Julie, we want to thank you for coming. It's very brave of you to come on and talk about this.
Well, thank you, and God bless you.
And if folks want to learn more about the Innocence Project, certainly they can go to their website. But also, if you'd like to learn more about what Julie's gone through, I know I've seen a couple of your things on YouTube. Because you've appeared on YouTube and through a radio broadcast.
Yes.
And you just appeared on
60 Minutes.
60 Minutes not too long ago.
Yes.
So that's another thing people can look at if they want to know more about what you've been through.
Sure, sure.
So Julie, thanks for coming.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Sharing this story. David, anything you'd like to say before we honor a fallen officer?
Yeah, if you see it, report it. That's about it.
All right. Folks, if you'll look on your screen, please keep in your thoughts and in your prayers Special Agent Joseph G. Lem of the United States Air Force Office of Special Investigations. Special Agent Lem was killed in the line of duty on December 1st, 2015. Special Agent Lem and 5 other special agents from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations were killed while conducting a joint operation with security officers from the United States Air Force, and those airmen, 2 airmen were injured, but the special agents were all killed. They were conducting a special operation in a village near Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. The agents and airmen were conducting this patrol as part of an investigation when the bomber drove a motorcycle into them and detonated the explosive. And again, please remember all of these men and women that served and died over there. And special note, Special Agent Lem was posthumously promoted to the rank of Special Agent within the United States Air Force Office of Special Investigations. But also, he had served, this man was a true American hero. He had served with the New York Air National Guard and had served as a member of the New York City Police Department as well for 15 years. The NYPD also posthumously promoted him to the rank of Detective First Grade. So remember all of these heroes, especially today, Special Agent Joseph G. Lem, in your thoughts and in your prayers. And please say a prayer for Julie's nephew Philip as well, that he has a long, happy life and may he have many years. And we thank you, Julie, for coming
Thank you
on.
very much.
Thanks once again. And folks, as we ask you to be connected with us at the West Bloomfield Police Department, remember you can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. I think I said it right that time, didn't I, Janine? She's just kind of waving it back. And you can also go to Nixle, and we'll send you real-time information about information that's pertinent to you. And you can also sign up for crime mapping if you'd like to find out trends in your community. We also like you to keep in touch with us here at West Bloomfield 911. Watch us on Civic Center TV, or you can watch us on demand at civiccentertv.com. I'm Officer Rick. Remember, my friends, take care of each other, be safe, love one another. Tomorrow is promised to no one. We'll see you again on West Bloomfield 911.